Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother asarimhotep with the Madu Andela Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture. And today is Sunday, February the 21st, 2021. And our discussion topic is addressing the question, were the Sumerians Black? A language and historical response. And this is a response to a recent conversation on the Dagger Squad page, and we'll get more into that a little later. But that and more when we return. Welcome. Hold on, I'm getting all these notifications on my phone / webcam for tonight. I appreciate all of you for joining in the conversation. I see David Shaw in the building. I see Brother Chavez, Brother Robert, Amedix, 82, Sister Tamika, and Emmanuel Adama. Thank you all for making yourselves known in the chat. Peace to Thought Evoker. Yeah, we in the building. Peace and blessings to all of you. And as I stated from the beginning, this is a conversation about whether the Sumerians are Black or not. And to accurately address that would take a series of videos and conversations. And I think I might actually do that in the coming month or so. I'm waiting on this small form PC that I ordered, and it should be here next Friday, or this Friday, actually. And once I get the PC up and running and I install the programs and all of the kind of stuff, I'm gonna start doing more focused and segmented videos that are not like live stream, that are just put together videos. And I think I will address the Sumerian question in one of those series. So I'll make them, sweet, to the point, a lot of graphics and music, and it should be live. But this specific conversation is addressing a few statements made by our good brother Chuck Morgan. Now, I've had Chuck Morgan on this program before, and so I want to say off the bat, this is not, a diss program or anything to that nature. It's just addressing something that he brought up on the Dagger Squad show, which was February the 18th, last week. And, Brother Garfield has his 20 for 20 segment where he's inviting 20 scholars, or 20 series of scholars in the case of his group shows, where, they're dealing with different aspects of the biblical history or claims that are made in the conscious community. And so on the number 14 was our good brother Chuck Morgan, who I think resides in Hawaii now. And he asked the question, were the Sumerians Black or African? And so if you look up Scholars 20 for 20, Chuck Morgan, were the Sumerians Black, African, on YouTube, you'll be able to see the full video and in context. And so because the video itself is an hour and 42 minutes, To address everything in that, again, would take just too much time. And so what I'm only focused on for the most part in this video, I'll address like 2 or 3 other slides, but I want to focus on his argument against Hermel Hermstein, who wrote a book, Black Sumer. And I think it's important that we address that and not leave it there just in the universe or the ether without critically analyzing some of the major arguments that our good brother Chuck Morgan made against Hermel Hermstein, another person who I've actually had on the show. So you can check out the Hermel Hermstein interview on my channel. So you can look that up in the search. And let me peace of Damien Damo Everly. Thank you for joining us. And Teti Usamaat Ras Neferu, Okwi, Brother Conan Lee, and Sister Anusha, peace and blessings, peace to Naja Phillips. Thank you all for joining, and thank you all those of you who are actually watching on Facebook as well. So we're streaming live on Facebook. Peace to OG Gorilla in the building. Thank you all for joining. And so some of this stuff, for those who follow me or have my works, you probably heard some of this. So it'll be on, it may be a refresher for you, some of this information, but now I'm going to put some of that information in context to an actual argument, and you'll see how this plays out. So without further ado, don't want to waste any more of your time. But before you go, for those of you who are new to the channel, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and the bell so that you get the notices when I post a video or do a live stream. And for everyone else, and for those who are just joining us, make sure that you smash the like button and that you share this conversation with friends and colleagues all over your social media. And so that way we can spread this knowledge worldwide. And so with that said, I'm going to go and share my computer. I'm on this other screen here. Booyah. And so let me make sure. Actually, I want to make this full screen. So let's share it like that. There we go. All right. And we will get started. So as I stated, you know, this is Were the Sumerians Black? A linguistic rebuttal. And as always, you know, unshameless plug. If you have not gotten a copy of Alluja Volume 2, I would encourage everyone to get it. Some of these arguments are actually made in this text. And so you can go online and go to my website and get it at a discount on my website, as well as the other book that came out in 2020, Towards a Comparative Dictionary of Chicam and Modern African Languages. Again, both are available on asarimhotep.com. And if you want to support this channel, you can, you know, send directly via Cash App at a, you know, $ asarimhotep, or you can use the button in the chat room if you're live in the chat. You know, any and all donations are welcome. And so the fundamental question about the Sumerians is there seems to be a quote unquote mystery of where the Sumerians came from. And the reason why they want to know where the Sumerians came from, because it is a belief that the Sumerians are the origin of quote unquote civilization, and which is a problematic uh, concept in the first place, but it's even more problematic because it is the argument is that this group of people are basically the origins of anybody else being civilized around the world. And there's just not enough evidence to support that hypothesis. And but secondly, what makes them kind of unique is that their language appears not to be related to any of the surrounding languages. So and they call a feature like that a linguistic or a language isolate. And it's an isolate because it appears to be isolated from any of the languages around it. And so there are a few languages like that around the world. For example, the Basque language in Europe. It appears not to be related to any of the languages in Europe or Indo-European, which dominates the European subcontinent. And so it's the same here with the Sumerian civilization. And so for those who are not familiar, ancient Sumer was a grouping of city-states. And that is roughly in what we now call southern Iraq. In ancient times, they're known for their cuneiform writing, and that area in Mesopotamia in general is believed to be the origins of agriculture and things of that nature. And so you'll see scholars trying to go back and forth to see who was earlier, the Egyptians or the Sumerians. And I roll with the Egyptian hypothesis for various reasons. And it's just no way that Sumer came before ancient Egypt. But as I will discuss later on, I'm going to show that the Sumerians and the ancient Egyptians are related to each other. And my argument is that the Proto-Sumerians are a group of Egyptians who left out of Egypt and migrated towards where they settled in what is now called Sumer. And so we'll get into that. And then, of course, again, in Alluja Volume 2, and in the text Towards a Comparative Dictionary of Chicam and Modern African Languages, I add some additional information to that initial hypothesis that I presented in Alluja Volume 2. So I will continue. So, there are a lot of people who claim that the Sumerians are Black. And of course, we never define how and what they mean by Black in terms of their skin color, or their features or their languages. And so, there's been a lot of, internet chatter, especially because, people like Zion Lex, tries to relate the Sumerians to the Hebrews and all of that. And then, of course, they try to use whatever data to make it seem as if they are older than Egypt. And then, of course, that the Sumerians civilized the Egyptians. So there's a lot of back and forth with these particular arguments. And so this is why I think Brother Garfield on the Dagger Squad channel, brung in our good brother Chuck Morgan to address this particular question, because Brother Garfield is always in a battle with the Hebrews, and especially with Zion Lex. And so it seems that his 20 for 20 is kind of aimed primarily at the Hebrews and people who make these particular types of arguments. And so but if you was just to look at some of the artwork like what we see here, a lot of African people will say, well, these people aren't Africans. And the problem with the argument by just looking at the pictures is, uh, one, the when certain people say African, they automatically go to a West Sub-Saharan African type, as if that is the representation of what it means to be African. And so in the academic literature, we call this the true Negro hypothesis. And so it's the true Negro hypothesis is a hypothesis that is problematic, because anything that deviates from that that so-called stereotype of which you find in Nigeria, you know, or in a Khan or whatnot, then it is not African. So if you see Africans with more narrow noses or curly hair or something like this, or lighter skin, well, then they automatically jump to the hypothesis that some Europeans or Western Asians came in and intermixed with these Africans, and then that's why they have these features. And so it is scientifically untenable, and just poor methodology and scholarship all around. And so you have to be more rigorous in your arguments, and uh, this is partially what we're addressing here. Um, and so, but as far as the skin color and hair features and all of that of the Sumerians, I won't be addressing in this video. So as the title states, a linguistic and historic argument or rebuttal concerning the slideshow that our good brother Chuck Morgan presented. And for the record, I had invited or have invited brother Chuck Morgan to be on this program, so that, you know, he can rebut or address any of the things that I'm going to say here. But he was unable to join. So I just want to put that out there. And so, you know, I like to, if I'm going to have a critique about someone's work, or statements made, my typical thing is to actually have them on the show, so that, you know, we can address it live. And so you know, the Sumerian language was spoken in ancient southern Mesopotamia, in the area roughly corresponding with modern Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Sumerian language is agglutinative. Its word order is subject, object, verb, with noun modifiers following the head noun. Sumerologists also note two main dialects present in the 3rd millennium BCE. There is the Northern Sumerian, which lacks vowel harmony and uses the prefix "a" to mark the passive voice. The Southern Sumerian possessed vowel harmony and used the prefix "ba" to mark the passive voice. We can clearly see that "ba-a" with loss of "b" in the Northern dialect. Both of these dialects were called Imigur. There was another tongue called Imisal, which is a dialect of women, Sal meaning woman, that was used in cultic texts dating from Old Babylonian period or later. Its vocabulary, pronunciation, and morphology are different than Imigur. And we'll probably see some of that later. So, you know, here's some of the advanced cuneiform script of the Sumerian script. And hold on. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So so this is just a picture of the cuneiform script and a small tablet or whatnot. I don't know what this is particularly. I just found it on the internet, and just wanted to give y'all um, an image of what the actual script looks like. So, as I mentioned earlier, that the Sumerian language is considered a language isolate, and in the absolute sense, it is a natural language with no demonstrable genealogical or genetic relationship with other languages, one that has not been demonstrated to descend from an ancestor common with any other language. Now, sometimes when they go and are quick to label a language isolate. Many times, certain scholars are just lazy and don't use the tools that we use in historical comparative linguistics to actually make their case. And that's what, is going to be kind of the heart of this discussion here, because Hermstein has argued that the Sumerian language is related to Proto-Bantu. And he was able to demonstrate that in his book, Black Sumer. And so when you read most of the literature on Sumerian by Sumeriologists and Assyriologists, they will make the claim that this language is not related to any other language. But the problem is that they never do the work to go through the process of demonstrating it. And so it is uh, a methodological error to just simply quote someone and say that, well, it's not related to anyone, and then use that as a way to critique another person who actually did the work and found the relationship. And so, everything on this channel, you know how we do. Demonstration beats conversation each and every time. And so, that's part of my critique against our good brother, Chuck Morgan. And so, at least in this area, in this aspect of his conversation on the Dagger Squad show, he provided no demonstration for many of his arguments against Hermstein or for any other kind of linguistic arguments. And you can't let that slide, as someone or as we like to say. You have to demonstrate your argument, and that includes falsifying somebody else's hypothesis. So you just can't say, "Oh yeah, well, I just don't agree," and then that be it, because you commit what we call a logical fallacy, which is appealing to authority. And in science, appealing to authority, just because someone has a PhD in something, doesn't mean anything. It is what you are able to demonstrate. What is the evidence for or against an argument? That's all that matters. We can give a rat's behind if you went to Yale University, Harvard, or you went to St. Philip's Community College. It matters not. If you can demonstrate using scientific methods and principles your argument and they can't falsify it, that's the argument we go with. And so I will continue. So again, I'm not going to address Chuck's whole presentation. Again, that will take too much time. And so we don't got that kind of time. And so I'll just address a few of the arguments. So this is one of his slides. This looks like slide 75 and of Chuck Morgan's presentation. So I screenshotted them. And so, hopefully y'all could read them well. I don't know how well they come across on the screen, but I'll be reading the paragraphs in the center just in case, y'all are not able to read it clearly. And so on this slide number 75, he says, the old interpretations of Sumerians are outdated. Blackheads as a term has no supporting evidence as a racial epithet. Therefore, it's illogical to conclude, based on interpretation, that the Sumerians would single out their heads as only black rather than a substantive term for the entire body or person being black. Yet black as a term to denote race was foreign in the Bronze Age. Even if it did mean black-skinned person, wouldn't necessarily mean a sub-Saharan African. Again, you can tell the way that he's wording this, that he's making these generalized arguments, but throughout his presentation, he never shows who's making these arguments. So, just because someone made an argument that the Sumerians are black, by what standard does that mean that they were, sub-Saharan African? Who made that claim? Where? What page? What's the date? Because we know that, blacks have left the continent, and there are still black people on all throughout Asia to this very day. Some as a result of the transatlantic, or the Arab slave trade, but there are others that are indigenous, like those who are in southern India, the Adamawa Islands, in Australia, and in Southeast Asia, and things of this nature. These people are black, and in terms of their skin color, and they have uh, varying types of phenotypes, in the same way that on the continent of Africa you have various types of phenotypes. And so again, this is one of the reasons why I've had Dr. Shamarka Keita on our program several times to help ingrain and get us more scientifically thinking about, human morphology and variation even amongst African people, and how we have to get out of these pseudo scientific terms and categorizations that keep us in these epistemological traps and making these circular arguments, all online and in our textbooks and things of this nature. So now, and so, this slide here is addressing the term, and we'll get to this term a little later, and the argument that the Sumerians called themselves the Black Heads. And so what Brother Chuck Morgan was addressing was the label, the Black Heads, and showing that there was no racial connotation, at this time, generally in history. But again, just because there was something that wasn't present in general doesn't mean in this context that it didn't exist. And so this is why I'm a vehement, advocate of proper methodology. You prove all things. You just don't make a claim for or against anything. You prove everything. And so, because there's, and I'm gonna provide a context for which this actually is a possibility, that these particular, Black African people were, may have identified themselves in this particular context. So we'll continue on to the next slide. And so I think this was the next slide. Yep, slide 76. He says, well, he's quoting this particular text, History in Black, African Americans in Search of an African Past, by Yaakov Shavit. And, this should, just by the title of the book, should also tell you the problematic nature of this particular source material in trying to articulate the intent and purpose for certain Africans in their scholarship and the certain arguments that they make. But that's a different conversation for a different time. So we see here on page 222, it states, "We do not know whether the term blackheads is meant as a realistic or figurative description." First of all, I should start off by, when he says we don't know, it's problematic when you start off a sentence like that, because you are implying that you have knowledge or a consensus for everyone who's this, for who did this analysis. So who is this we? Don't know. In a text like this, you say I don't know. You can't see what he committed here just at the start of this sentence is what we call a transsubstantive error. That means he takes information from one area for which he is familiar, his own research, and then tries to apply it in other areas in which he has no knowledge. And so that is a transsubstantive error. So when he says, we do not know whether the term, no, you do not know whether the term blackheads is meant as a realistic or figurative description. Logic suggests that if, or suggested that if the reference was to blacks in the African sense, black-bodied or a similar phrase would have been more apposite than the ultra-specific blackheads. Moreover, we have already seen that the color black in antiquity usually denoted character traits or age. Now, I haven't read this book, so I don't know what proof or what evidence he provided for that statement. But you know, hopefully it isn't like in the error which he started off, because you know, again, when he says in antiquity, who is he talking about? What time period and what people? Does this apply universally? Again, a transsubstantive error. So any physiognomic similarities between Sumerians and Black Africans would hardly have been all-inclusive. Moreover, nowhere in the entire corpus of Afrocentric historical scholarship or in its much quoted sources is there any evidence of cultural similitude. Again, this was written in 2001. And so I don't know if this person, you know, what knowledge does this person have on Afrocentric writings to make this argument? And does this person know who an Afrocentric scholar is? Because what you'll find amongst a lot of Europeans and in their critiques about Black folks, they think that anybody who writes about who's Black, who writes about Black people, somehow that makes them Afrocentric. And then they label all of them as Afrocentric scholars. And so, you know, just by this paragraph alone, I could tell he's very sloppy. And but we will address him this particular quote later on in a little bit more detail, and especially this last part where he said there is not any evidence of any cultural similitude. Again, you know, there is some scholarship that came and was published after this, which we'll cite. But I want to know exactly what is his references, what text was he looking at to make this argument. And so, another critique I have about Chuck Morgan is that on slide number 105, he says, in what's a very noticeable contradiction and or a bold deception before even opening the book is its cover. The author claims a Black African Sumer simultaneously presenting a non-Black Neo-Sumerian statue of Gudea of Lagash, 2144 to 2124, excuse me, 2144 to 2124 BC, reigning after Sargon of Akkad and the Gutian empires. Now, of course, he's addressing this book, Black Sumer, The African Origins of Civilization by Hermel Hermstein. And while I think it is a valid critique in general, ultimately it's irrelevant. And the reason why it's irrelevant is because, to my knowledge, Hermel Hermstein doesn't even make the argument that this person is supposed to represent someone Black. Hermel Hermstein's book right here is a linguistic book. It's about linguistics. It's about demonstrating the language of Sumer is cognate with African languages. So the excuse me, the fundamental argument here is again is irrelevant. And you can't use that to make an argument against his linguistic arguments, because again, the textbook is a linguistic argument. And so this holds no weight. And I think last of these slides, he on slide number 115, he is trying to make a critique of Hermel Hermstein, who cites. Remember, we're going back to the whole blackheads conversation and showing. And let me back up a little bit. So there are arguments by many persons that the phrase blackheads that is used in Sumerian is a reference to the skin color and the blackness of the people. And so, familiar with that argument, Hermstein in his book Black Sumer shows and demonstrates the same phraseology used in a racial context amongst the Igbos, the modern Igbos of, southeastern Nigeria or southern. Well, I think they're in southwest primarily too as well, but the Yoruba dominate in that area. But they have a similar term. And so what he's showing on the left-hand side are the entries given by Hermel Hermstein. And Hermel Hermstein, cites his text adequately all throughout, or cites his arguments throughout his text very thoroughly. And so he references the dictionary of Onitsha Igbo and pages 116 and 226. And so this phrase here, Isi Oji, Africans or the black race. The word Oji is the word for black in Igbo, and Isi is the word for head and chief. And then he provides these phrases here, Indi Isi Oji, the Africans, literally the black-headed people. And the word Indi is a word for nation and people. And then Obodo Isi Oji, Africa, literally the black-headed country. And that word Obodo is a word for country. And so on the right-hand side, you see the citation from the dictionary. And what Brother Chuck Morgan is trying to say is that he is not citing the citation accurately. And I don't see how he can put up the actual citation next to it and say that he's not citing it correctly. This is exactly what you find on the right-hand side from K. Williamson's text. And so you see the word OG, a blackness. OG, black, blackish. GOG, be dark colored. OG, Africans, black race. Isi OG, Africa, Africans, black race. Indi Isi OG, the Africans, the black race. Obodi Isi OG, Africa, et cetera, et cetera. So now what Chuck Morgan is trying to say and make an argument is that, Hermel Hermstein put in the brackets, literally blackhead people. And then in the other one, literally blackhead country, and trying to say that because Hermstein added that is not in the original citation in the dictionary of Onitsha Igbo. That's irrelevant because Hermstein is accurately citing what the words mean. He gave you the definition. That's what it literally means. Indi Isi Oji or Isi Oji, it literally means black heads. So you can't use that argument against Hermstein. He cited it correctly, and that's exactly what it literally means in the language. And so now what Chuck Morgan rightfully notes is that this concept of the black heads being used in terms of used in a racial context is modern, and as a result of interactions with European people. And so if Hermstein was to try to make this seem as this has always been the case, then Hermstein would be wrong. But what's significant about this is that the question is that why doesn't the Igbo say black skinned people? Why do they say the black heads to address a racial concept. So this is what I think Hermstein is trying to emphasize here, that to reference their blackness, the Ebos, who are related people to the Sumerians based on the linguistic arguments that was made throughout his text, are using the same phraseology and what we call in linguistics the semantics, and we'll get to what a semantics is a little later, that they're using the same semantics to reference this particular concept. And that is significant for this conversation. And so I just wanted to bring clarity and address that as well. And I think this is the last slide. Yeah, so that's the last one. Chuck Morgan states, from reading Williams, and that's Dr. K. Williams, Igbo dictionary, head had a variety of meanings. Leadership not consistently as a physical head. You will not find blackhead as a racial identity for the Sumerians. Keep in mind that the use of the term black as applied to an ethnic or racial group didn't exist until the 14th century, lasting from January the 1st, 1301 to December 31st, 1400, according to the online etymological dictionary, and wouldn't have been a part of the Igbo language as a racial term until after the 14th century. Therefore, how could the ancient Igbo and the Sumerians use such a term to describe themselves as such when the term hadn't developed yet? And hold on. Yeah, so I agree with that. And actually, I am missing a slide because there's a slide after this where Chuck makes the argument that Hermel Hermstein is arguing that the Sumerians were Ebos. And I don't know where he got that from. And he didn't cite a page. And he wouldn't cite a page because Hermel Hermstein never made that argument. He's just showing a semantic correspondence between the two languages in terms of what we call a semantics. So I will continue. And so for those of you who are familiar with my argument, again, my argument is that the Sumerians who existed, I don't even know if y'all can see my mouse circulating on the right-hand part of the conversation, that the Sumerians ultimately in pre-dynastic Egyptian times moved out of the Nile Valley into southern Iraq with a group of other folks, and there was a series of migrations into the Levant, which helped to form the Proto-Semitic languages, and then some who moved further that contributed to the development of Proto-Indo-European. And the Sumerian language is the last surviving language of this proto group who migrated out of Africa in more recent times. So we're not talking about the out of Africa Africans. And so these relatively, historically speaking, anywhere between 5,000 and I'll say 5,500 to 4,000 BCE, that these groups of Africans moved out of the Nile Valley into what we call Mesopotamia, and contributed to the development of the cultures and the outlook in the languages there. And so again, more detail is in the book and some upcoming texts which will explore that in more depth. And so y'all know I subscribe to the Negro Egyptian theory in terms of the grouping of languages, which I have renamed Chiena into. And and so this is kind of a map of the post-classic stage of Chiena into. And as you can see here on the bottom left-hand side, that I grouped the Sumerian language with Hausa, Middle Egyptian, the Mande, and the Zande languages. And so that is a conversation that is for another day. But just wanted to kind of show you this grouping here of these languages that originated in Central East Africa. And you see my arrow of the Sumerians, coming from here. So I just want to give you uh, the context and for the argument. So what my argument is that there were already a group of people. These are the people who remain there and have been there for a very long time. Your out of Africa people who have gone through a lot of physiological change and things of that nature. And so these African people come later and settle among them. And so you have a group of Africans, the Proto-Sumerians, who come and settle in this area. Remember that Sumeria is not a political state. It's a city state. It's just a group of cities that they settled in one and developed one city, but it was an influential. Their cultural outlook and things were more advanced than the local population, which is why the local population adopted the culture and language of this influential group who settled there. And this happens a lot in history. And people are hesitant to go into that direction because they're afraid of being hyper diffusionists. But this is what happens all the time. Matter of fact, the Proto-Germanic languages is a result of that very same process. So when the more advanced Proto-Indo-Europeans came up against, for example, the people who were living originally in like Scandinavia and things, these folks adopted the Proto-Indo-European language, but changed its fundamental phonology and morphology and things of this nature, and it developed so significantly that it became Proto-Germanic and the Germanic languages which we speak today. Which is why the Germanic languages sound so much more different than, for example, your Celtic or your Latin, Spanish, or Greek, or something to this nature. And so this is a lot of history that has to be discussed. And this is Hermstein's Black Sumer, the African Origin of Civilization, is the first one dealing with linguistics. But then he has a second book, Black Sumer, the Physical Evidence, Part 1, and there's a Part 2 that I think is in development. And he discusses that in our interview on my channel that happened earlier in 2020. And so, again, I encourage everyone who wants to, get the latest on what he's doing in the Black Sumer series to look into that. And so it's interesting that that citation that he mentioned tries to make the argument that there is no correlation, no correspondences whatsoever, but the very fundamental and basic human words that exist in the Sumerian language are the exact same ones you find amongst the Black African and ancient Egyptians. And so you have this word here, the Sumerian word urum, meaning male. You find this in Chiluba Bantu as chilum, sperm, mulume, husband, man, lume, male and masculine. In the Coptic language is rome, man, husband. And in Middle Egyptian, remech, man. And we'll see in terms of these correspondences later that this is significant. And so, so Chuck, what slide is this? This is 121, and Chuck makes this argument, or he cites this text here, in the beginnings of his critiques of Hermel Hermstein's Black Sumer text, the part 1 that we saw earlier. And he says, as an example, Hermstein takes the position that Imi-Gur, the Sumerian language, and Proto-Bantu are directly related using a linguistic comparative method, which now I have to stop here before I read the next paragraph. You have to be careful of your wording. So when Brother Chuck Morgan says that Hermstein takes the position that Imi-Gur and Proto-Bantu are directly related using a linguistic comparative method, it gives the impression that he just randomly chose a method. He didn't choose a method, he chose the comparative method. And the comparative method is the standard method in historical comparative linguistics to establish genetic relationships between two or more languages. And in the conversation on the Dagger Squad, Brother Chuck Morgan said that he'd been studying this for like a little bit over a year. And I can tell that, you know, he's still kind of new in this, even if he is studying primarily the Sumerian and he's getting familiar with the Sumerian script. The to make a linguistic critique is going to take you some years of study in terms of using the historical comparative method and things of that nature. So it's obvious here, and so I'll continue. And so he's citing this text, Theoretical Basis of Indo-European Linguistics, Winfred P. Lehman, 1993. In linguistics, the comparative method is a technique for studying the development of languages by performing a feature-by-feature comparison of two or more languages with common descent from a shared ancestor, and then extrapolating backwards to infer the properties of that ancestor. See what, well, I can't say that our good brother Chuck Morgan is not familiar with, but he did not provide in his presentation his knowledge of these earlier works before Hermstein. So as I said before, the relationship between Sumerian and Bantu is the scholarship dealing with that is 100 years old. And this text, which I have posted here, is by Reverend W. Wanger. And the text is titled Comparative Lexical Study of Sumerian and Bantu, Sumerian, the Sanskrit of the African Intu languages. This was published again in 1935. There was actually a text published, there was about a few texts published before this text, but this one is one of the more significant ones because this one provides the type of relationships which establishes that the correspondences between Bantu and Sumerian are not coincidental. And matter of fact, the primary comparison in Wanger's text here is between the Zulu language and Sumerian. And he uses the other Bantu languages as reinforcement of the argument. And he establishes sound laws. He establishes morphological rules between the two languages. It's a very comprehensive text. And I have this text, but it's in my storage in Philly. Otherwise, I would scan some pages out of it and show y'all what is in it. It's a hard book to get now. We have, you know, an examination in Robin Walker's text, When We Ruled, that was published before Hermstein, who made these same arguments. It's the last chapter in the text. Then you have the work by the linguist and classicist scholar, Dr. G.J.K. Campbell Dunn, and he wrote a text or published a text, I should say, in 2009, two texts to be exact, Sumerian and Niger Congo. Excuse me, that's not the name of the text. It's Sumerian Comparative Grammar and Sumerian Comparative Dictionary. And he makes the argument that the Sumerian is a Niger Congo language. And that is in alignment with what you saw from Wagner and what you see in Robin Walker's text. The person in Walker's text who actually did the linguistic analysis was Fari Sapari, and who was a kind of a mentor for or an advocate for Hermstein and his development and argumentations for the Sumerian and Proto-Bantu relationship. So you also have the text here, Jean-Claude Embolis, that was published in 2010, that's written in French, The Origin of African Languages. Now, Emboli, looking at the Sumerian and looking at the Negro Egyptian languages, the African languages, saw a kind of relationship there. But he, in his text, he argues that the Sumerian language was heavily influenced by Negro Egyptian languages. So he doesn't count it as a Negro Egyptian language in this text. But I can tell you that from my personal correspondences and showing him the relationship and the correspondences and the semantics that I've developed over the years, he has changed his position and considers Sumerian a Negro Egyptian language. And so this is significant. So I just want to show these particular works to show that Hermstein is not random. There's scholarship, again, going back 100 years, and there's other people who I haven't cited here yet who have noticed the relationship between Bantu languages and Sumerian. And so I am the latest scholar in that lineage who demonstrates these facts. And some of that we will get into, saying today. Now, in this slide, this is slide 122, he says the linguistic arguments from Hermstein are speculative, cherry-picking words from a language and attempting to propose cognates, particularly with Sumerian, is not recognized by linguists as a proper methodology. This approach seems to be a common rabbit hole for confirmation bias. If this method were valid, one would presume that Tamil, Arabic, Turkish, Basque, and Hungarian must all be closely related languages. Obviously, they're not. Therefore, it's a bogus proposal. Nevertheless, some language enthusiasts have used this method, in quotes, and found cognates in the above with Emigur. Leading scholars on the topic have formed a consensus that there's not enough evidence to establish the Sumerian language as being directly related to any other languages, and thus maintain Sumerian as a language isolate. Again, you never go by what so-called consensus is, because most people in the humanities aren't scientists, and so they don't know what the hell a consensus is. There's a difference between a consensus and popular opinion. And a consensus is for people who have actually done the work and have come to a conclusion using some kind of scientific method to come to their conclusion. There are very few works, if any, that have actually made any kind of serious comparisons to even make these kind of arguments. And so that's why demonstration beats conversation. You never simply go by anyone's word. Where did they show, for example, that Tamil, Arabic, and Turkish, and Basque or Hungarian are not closely related languages? Who did that work? What's the name of the text? So just as much as we say that, we have to see the evidence for something, you also have to see the evidence against something. So that's what the scientific method is for, is to falsify hypotheses. So if somebody is making an argument that Tamil, Arabic, and Turkish, and Basque, and Hungarian are related languages, you just can't just, because you feel like it on the whim, just dismiss it. You have to demonstrate that that is not the case. And you have to do it very in-depthly. And of course, in the reverse, the person who's making that argument, you're going to have to show in-depthly that Tamil, Arabic, Turkish, Basque, and Hungarian are related languages. And so again, he provides no text whatsoever outside of Hermstein, which shows the relationship between Sumerian and Bantu and Niger-Congo, so-called Niger-Congo languages. And he doesn't have the expertise to be able to critique the work. And so this is something that is missing from a lot of these discussions. You have to have the skill set to be able to evaluate the arguments made in certain text. And so if you are just a casual learner, you know, and you aren't interested in joining forensics or studying linguistics in depth, you can get away with just dealing with what the authors, the experts say, because you have no interest in going in that field and making an argument. But as soon as you come into the public and you make an argument against something, you are now have to have the prerequisite skill set to be able to make that argument and critique. And so we continue. And so when we're talking about doing etymologies and showing relationships and things of this nature, there's steps and there's a lot of things that we have to examine in this process. And so there's a text called The Continuum Companion to Historical Linguistics, edited by Sylvia Laraji and Vit Bubinik. And in this text on pages 313 and 314, when it comes to he's discussing the concept of etymology and its alleged origins with Socrates and the difference between how when Socrates was doing it and how we do it in modern times. And so in that discussion in that context, he says the following: the big difference between Socrates' approach and the modern etymology is nowadays one tries to argue systematically in all strata, in phonology, in morphology, and in semantics, pragmatics, and also in extralinguistically in philology and culture. One also takes into account historical developments. If one wants to be a productive and successful expert in etymology, one has to thoroughly study all the areas mentioned. And so what he says here is these 6 fundamental areas of etymology: phonology, morphology, semantics, pragmatics, philology, culture, and history. If you are trying to make arguments against somebody and their work, you have to demonstrate it in all of these 6 areas here. The first 3 are linguistic, and number 4 is 5 and 6 are extra linguistic. So, it's Chuck hasn't done this to know how to critique Hermel Hermstein's work. And I should go back because I didn't address this. In this slide 22, he says the linguistic arguments from Hermstein are speculative. Cherry picking words from a language and attempting to propose cognates is not recognized by linguists as a proper methodology. I'm wondering, did he even read the text? Because Hermel Hermstein gives you the historical comparative method and cites the sources and shows you how it is done and then proceeds to do it. He doesn't cherry pick random words. I don't know where he got that from. What Hermel Hermstein does is take basic vocabulary words. The standard in historical comparative linguistics is to examine the basic vocabulary words, like words for human being that I showed earlier, like what you see here. This is a basic vocabulary word, a word for a human being, a man, a male. It's not random. Anybody who is comparison is going to look for this word in the compared languages. And Hermel Hermstein has, close to 200, compared words of basic vocabulary. We call it the Swadesh list. Hold on a sec. It's called the Swadesh list. And that's what he uses in his comparison. And he groups them and organizes them by the initial consonant that is being compared, so that you see an array of vocabulary words in certain particular contexts. So I really don't know where he got that from, if he has the text, because there's just no way possible that you could have or that he could have come to that conclusion reading Hermel Hermstein's text. They weren't cherry picked. They're part of a Swadesh, the 100 and 200 Swadesh list. Every linguist uses it. So I continue. So in that same article on etymology, Thomas Critch continues and says, in the 19th and 20th centuries, starting with Jacob Grimm, Franz Bopp, and Rasmus Rask, the comparative method based on strict morphological, phonological, and lexical comparison was developed. The most important output of the research was the discovery of sound laws, which mediate between cognate languages, their respective older stages, and their common predecessors. This research in turn relies on good etymologies of words that exemplify the sound laws and the regularities of word formation. And so this is what we're looking for when we're doing these types of comparisons. It's the regular, non-accidental occurrence of sound meaning correspondences between two or more languages. And this is exactly what happens. See, this would be an example of cherry picking. So, for example, in the English language, we have a word mess, which means a dirty or untidy state of things or of a place. In the Kaqchikel Mayan language, they have a word mess, which means mess, disorder, and garbage. Now, for someone who is randomly cherry picking, they would look at this and say, well, these are the same words. And, it's a possible relationship between this Mayan language and the English language, which is which is an Indo-European Germanic language. And so, and I have here highlighted the initial consonant and the second consonant in between the two words. So M and S is the consonantal skeleton in both of these words. But when we do a first initial consonant test, we see that, words for M that begin with M in English have no counterpart in the Kaqchikel language. There's no correspondences here. And so you have to conclude, and if we were to do and provide more examples, we would see the same thing. This is just here to make the point that in linguistics, we do these tests so that we can eliminate chance as a reason for the alleged correspondences. Because if M and M corresponded in between English and Kaqchikel, then we would see M and M correspond in the same consonant position, with other words. And we don't see that here. And so, as I continue, so it's not like, the kinds of correspondences, for example, that we see here. So this is between the Zande language, Middle Egyptian, the Somali language, and the Coptic language. So this word bere, liver, is cognate with this word, heart soul in Middle Egyptian, the so-called ba, and be'er, liver in Somali. But the Coptic language doesn't retain the Middle Egyptian version. And y'all should know that we consider Coptic a separate language from what we deem Middle Egyptian, but that's a whole different discussion itself as well. And so we see here that the correspondences between the B sounds. So, B here, B here, B here, R here. This is an R type sound here, R here. And then this word for forest, bire, forest. And then berit or bulati or bulata, bush. And be'er, garden. And bo, bush in Coptic. We see a repeat of the consonant between the two. So even there's a slight deviation here in terms of para, egg, and parrot, fruit, and bead, egg. And so what is this may not seem like they're the same, but they are, because what the historical knowledge informs us is that the word for egg and for fruit was based on its roundness. And so this is a derived term um, based on a round. And we can go on and on. You see the correspondences, are regular between the languages. And so the standard method is to understand, and one of the reasons why I wanted to show this slide and is because you see a difference in the shape of the languages here. So notice that these are consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, or consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant languages and forms. So the same word in the Zande language, bere, B-E-R-E, is in Somali, B-E-E-R. And allegedly, these are two different language families, according to the Greenberg method. And we argue that the Middle Egyptian is what we call a bere language, a consonant vowel language. And that Coptic is like Somali, and that is a consonant vowel consonant. But the point here is that we're comparing the two consonants, and it would be highly improbable that you can get four languages to correspond randomly with the same two consonants in sequence. It's virtually impossible unless there was this kind of global, worldwide diffusion event. And so, to demonstrate the methodology here, and this is what Chuck should have done, he should have provided the steps and provided the methodology to make his argument against Hermstein. And so, this is an article by the Egyptologist and linguist Frank Camerzel. The title of the article is Old Egyptian and Pre-Old Egyptian, Tracing Linguistic Diversity in Archaic Egypt and the Creation of the Egyptian language. And so he provides here the criterion for helping to establish the relationship between two or more languages. And so he gives these three criteria here. So the first one is that there are not only roots or word stems which are similar in shape and meaning, but both systems also exhibit similar sets of stem extensions and or derivative affixes used on the same basis. So he's talking about morphology here. So remember that we read earlier that it has to be dealing, morphology is one of the six criteria when establishing, the etymology and ultimately the relationship between languages and words. The second one is particular lexemes exhibit formally similar suppletive stems in both systems. A suppletive stem, I won't get into detail of that, but that's something like, good, better, best. If you can find that series of words in a related language for and cognate for all three of those words, then that would be considered a suppletive stem. So, but lastly, and this is the most important one here for our purposes, in either system, there are similar groups of semantically distinct lexemes which share the same phonological shape or matching groups of phonologically distinct lexemes having the same meaning. So, for example, roots of the consonantal shape ML serve to express the semantic concept of black, sing, and weak in the Indo-European as well as in Egyptian. Since there is no apparent universal conceptual resemblance between black, sing, and weak, the probability that two distinct languages denote these meanings by means of the same root independently from each other is extremely small. So what he's trying to say is that in both Indo-European and in Egyptian, there is a consonant sequence M and L that a separate word with the consonant sequence ML means black, and there's another one that means sing, and there's another one with a different group of vowels that means weak. The fact that you find this consonant sequence with these meanings in both Indo-European and Egyptian tells you that there's a relationship there, and that the idea that this is accidental is small and next to nil. And so, why is this important? This is why you always have to cite directly to people that you're critiquing. And so, Hermel Hermstein in his Black Sumer, the African Origins of Civilization text, he, as I said before, he gives you the comparative method, and he the first part of his book is just explaining how linguistics is done. And so in this part of the text, he says, it should be emphasized that cognacy is based on recurrent sound correspondences and not sound resemblance. We can illustrate this with the English word heart, which has an identical sound to the German word heart. But this is a chance resemblance. Even though English and German are related, this does not automatically make them cognates. We know it is a chance resemblance because the German heart is actually cognate with the English word hard. We know that they are cognate because the observed recurring sound correspondences of German T is with English D. Recurrent sound correspondences are the only way to demonstrate genetic relationships between languages. They exclude chance resemblances. The linguistic researcher Faris Sapia has devised what we shall call the repeat initial consonant correspondence test, with a view to excluding chance by quick inspection of a word list. So Sapia was just dealing with one consonant, the first consonant. So now he continues a conversation, and he does exactly what Camerzel that we cited earlier did. He says, so some languages are, however, dominated by roots which have a consonant vowel or a consonant vowel consonant structure. This means that finding a four consonant paradigm in basic vocabulary, notice this word basic vocabulary again, because that's what you deal with when you're dealing with comparing languages, after the manner suggested by Nichols, would be almost impossible in a comparison of two consonant vowel consonant languages. There will be many two consonant paradigms, but not four consonant paradigms. Such languages, however, tend to have a high number of homophonous roots, that is, roots which have the same sounds but two or more unconnected meanings. If a consonant vowel consonant root with the exact same two unconnected meanings is found in a second language with reoccurrent sound correspondences, then this is a four consonant paradigm. This kind of evidence is probative or individual identifying because it is very unlikely to occur by chance. It is also very unlikely that a consonant vowel consonant root's two unconnected meanings of basic vocabulary would both be borrowed by another language. In this way, the repeated two consonant paradigm was devised by the present author, having been inspired by the work of Nichols. And as I've stated, I've been doing this before the knowledge of Hermstein. And of course, this is the standard way in which it is done. And so this is why I cited Frank Camerzel's text from 2001. to show that, Hermstein did not invent that method. It's a standard method, but it's the same thing. If you have a two consonant paradigm, it is very unlikely that you're going to have these two consonants in sequence in both Indo-European and in Egyptian, meaning black, sing, and weak. And then as you see, he's saying the same thing here. So again, to what's the name's point, or argument, Chuck's point on an argument, I don't see where he got that from, that he was just cherry picking words and not establishing sound meaning correspondences, especially when he's citing in the very text from 2012, the methodology and why he does it. And so what I'm saying here is that our good brother Chuck Morgan is misrepresenting Hermel Hermstein's text and misrepresenting his argument. So this is why when someone gives a critique, you just don't believe the critique. You have to go back and critically examine their critique and read the source material in which they're critiquing to make sure that they are accurately representing the arguments made by the initial author. Because what you'll find all the time is that people will make comments and things and be misrepresenting the arguments by the initial authors. And so this is an example using the very words that Hermstein used in terms of Proto-Bantu and Sumerian. Now, what I did is I added the ancient Egyptian to it. So the likelihood that these two consonants in sequence, notice that I have them lined up here. These words here are actually in Hermstein's work. So you can see that these were not cherry picked. The word for side, body, rib is a basic vocabulary word, an open place. The word for color, or to boil, to cook, or to count. These aren't random words. These are basic vocabulary words. So when we see, for example, in this first row, side of body, rib, the side. In Sumerian, bar, outside, side. Also back, shoulder, and liver. And in Chikam, bur and baru, outside, benru. And this lets you know this is an L sound in the New Kingdom when they put the combination of N and R together. For this second one, these are all the same word here. And then you see this other variation, bada, open place, that is within the same semantic fields. This word bada here, color and spec, and then bada, a color term, and then bird, pigment, a pellet of pigment in the New Kingdom. Bid, boil, to be cooked. Bala, to boil. Bur, to boil. Notice that this consistent, that B in the first consonant position is corresponding with B in the first consonant position in Sumerian and Proto-Bantu. And then the same thing in Egyptian, which I call Chikam. And then in the second consonant position, you see consistency here. The D sound corresponds to Sumerian R and L. And I'll show in other contexts where the R and L interchange even in Sumerian. But you see it's R in Egyptian. And so, we have to be careful. This is why demonstration beats conversation. Because it would be impossible if Sumerian was a true language isolate and it wasn't related to any other language, it would be impossible to find a series of correspondences like this in basic vocabulary between Bantu and ancient Egyptian with Sumerian. It would be impossible. And so we do the same thing here. So this one isn't as clear cut as the other example. So now we have in Proto-Bantu T, and is the first consonant, and then the consonants in the second consonant position. So you have tang, drip, fall, and drops. And then in Sumerian, you have sheg, to fall as dew, to rain, rain. And then in Egyptian, shin, shini, rainstorm, dew. And then this is other suffix here that you see. And then you have tangu, house, ground, wall. Missing in Sumerian, but consistent in Egyptian. Shinu, workhouse, farm building, storeroom. Deck house, storehouse. Same consonant sequence. And then we go further here and we see a different consonant sequence. So it's the same here in Bantu. Tangu, ground. Ashang, a field. And then Shedi, field, meadow, parcel of land. Thang, reed. She, to call, is missing the second consonant. And Shidi, to read. And I discuss in the book how to read and to call are the same thing in these particular languages. And so it would be impossible to show these types of correspondences. And the reason why, you have a lot of these mainstream, Assyriologists and Sumeriologists not catching these correspondences is because they aren't familiar with African languages and or the comparative method. And so we continue. It's the same thing here. And I'll just leave this up for the group if y'all ever want to just pause, do a screenshot, do whatever it is that you do. And you can see for yourself, it's the same thing. It's the regularity of the sound meaning correspondences between the two languages, or two or three languages. That's why it's best to do 3 languages when you're doing your comparisons. So now we deal with morphology. So here I'm doing a comparison between the so-called feminine T suffix in Egyptian and the chi prefix in Chiluba Bantu. So you can see in these words that I have highlighted in red, where in Egyptian it is suffixed by T, in Bantu and particularly in Chiluba it is prefixed by chi. This is regular. This is a grammar feature. This is morphology. This is proof of a genetic relationship between the two languages. There's no linguist who can counter this and call it random. So now that we have this established between the two languages, I show here that this can be found in words, certain words, dealing with places. And so Chiminga, city, town, urban center; Chipapu, flat surface, region; Chikulu, Jikolo, site of abandoned village; Chilamba, bridge; Chikumbi, stable fence; Chidwaya, tomb or grave. In the Kiswahili language, the chi is ki. It is a morpheme meaning place. And I show this here. This is part of my larger argument of the meaning of Kemet debate. And so I can skip this. But you see the same feature here in the Sumerian. So the Sumerian has the word ki, and it's a word for place that is used for the abstract. And so I should say that as well, that this suffix here, this class 7 nominal prefix in Chiluba, is also used for place or the abstract. And it nominalizes verbs. And so you see the same thing here in Sumerian. So we have kiduru, a disease; kidur, a stool, from the verb dur, to sit; Kiburu, harvest area, Kibala, rebel land, Kigiri, road path. And this word giri derives from a root meaning leg and to walk or run, etc., etc. And so when we compare the two, now I'm not saying that the roots are cognate. That's not what we're arguing here. I'm showing you that the same grammatical feature in Chiluba, chi, is found in Sumerian, ki, for the same words, even if they are not cognate themselves. So they have the same grammatical morpheme. City, town, urban center, Chiminga. City, town, Kiiri. Chipapu, flat surface region. Actually, I have an updated version of this, and I found a relevant one for these two here that I have emptied right now. But you know, Chikulu, Jikolo, site of an abandoned village. Iria, wasteland. It's the loss of the K sound. And so just like how you have Kijiji, village, Iduru, village, loss of K again here. But the same word for fence. So Chikumbi, stable fence. Different root word, but the same grammatical feature. So it is highly unlikely that Sumerian would have the same grammatical feature and use them in the same exact way for words meaning the same thing in a different language. This is not random. This is proof that these are related. They're inherited. And so as I showed earlier, the chi in Chiluba is cognate with the T in the suffix T in Egyptian. And as we can see here, and I actually have more examples. I just wanted to fit everything into one slide. This suffix, it corresponds to ki and kur. It's a reduction of, see this word ki meaning place, ground, earth, land, toward, underworld, land, country, tower, and lower, down below, is the same thing for this six, but they derive from this word ki or kur and kir in terms of the Sumerian underworld, land, country, mountain, east, easterner, east wind. And we say ta, but it's ter, just like in the word territory. Earth, land, country, or whatnot. It's the reduction into burn, and kur to burn, to light up, etc., etc. And you know, you get more examples in the chapter 7 of my book, Allusion Volume 2, as well as in Towards a Comparative Dictionary. And so he says, we do not know, and I'm just repeating this slide again, where Chuck is is citing this text where they say that there is no evidence of cultural similitude that you see right here. And this is why we don't speak before we do the work. And this is why, you know, it's problematic when people try to summarily dismiss the relationship between Sumerian and African people and cultures and languages without doing any kind of investigation on their own whatsoever. And so what we see here is I'm introducing or reintroducing this concept of the semantics. And what I have here, I just did a rough translation from French into English of this section of Jean-Claude Embolis' work, where he talks about the semantics. And so he says, what G. Manessi calls semantics, that is to say, how speakers of a language analyze reality and transform it into words or groups of words. More than morphology or basic vocabulary, we believe it is especially the semantics that is kept, and I spelled kept wrong there, most in a language. We saw in the previous chapter that in the 6 languages considered, there is a very strong association between the mouth and the floor, to the point that it is the same word that is used to refer to one and the other realities, about of the form and even the origin of the word. This conversation of semantics through time is far from being limited to African languages. Just to be convinced to analyze the French comprendre, that word comes from Latin comprehendere, catch all. The use of the concept of gripping express understanding is a semantics that continues to this day, with the use of verbs enter and capture to say to understand. Have you understood what I said? And so what it's saying is that there's it, uh, a group of people, and especially in a language family, they have a way of looking at the world. Their worldview influences how they group words and how they map them to concepts in reality. And you can distinguish certain groups of people by their semantics. And so this is a criterion that we use in linguistics to further establish the relationship between two or more groups. Because this will let us know if the dominant group or not is the people who sent the words for to be borrowed, or is this group the receivers of words that are borrowed? Because if they don't have the same semantics as the original language, then this helps to solidify, for example, that this word is a borrowing or not. And so so I'm gonna give you a few examples of the semantics. So we were introduced to Dr. G.J.K. Campbell Dunn earlier, and in his Sumerian grammar text on page 11, he's talking about the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. And this is his commentary. Egyptian hieroglyphs uses many recognizable pictographs and combines ideographic and phonetic notation, but not in the same way as Sumerian determinatives, and partial phonetic indications are added to clarify the core word. Hieroglyphics incorporates a consonantary, however, not a syllabary. I suspect the consonantary arose through applying a syllabic script designed for a language with few vowels to a foreign tongue with a vowel system that did not match. The Egyptian writing of 3 vowels by using consonantal syllables implies reduction of the wu to u, yi to e, etc. The kind of change is typical of Niger Congo and Nilo-Saharan. The Egyptian, and I have this bolded, the Egyptian practice of attaching a snake to the sun sign shows that the hieroglyphs were once used to write a Niger Congo language, in which the snake and the sun were denoted by the same word, such as Ra or Da. Egyptian vowels may have been indeterminate, however. The Rabus principle is a prominent feature which suggests hieroglyphics once wrote a non-Egyptian language, with numerous homophones, such as occur in Niger Congo. The Rabus principle is based on homophony, which is not a feature of Egyptian. The same Egyptian sign is freely used for words that are phonetically diverse. But this is true also of Sumerian. It is explained by a pictographic ideographic source. And so, he's of the Greenberg school, so he speaks heavily of Niger Congo and Nilo-Saharan and Afro-Asiatic, etc. But what he's saying here is that the concept of associating a snake and the sun is not arbitrary. That this concept is found highly amongst the so-called Niger Congo and Nilo-Saharan languages. Remember, Bantu is a so-called Niger Congo language. And this is, what we argue is that the case is because they derive from the same root. Because the ultimate root for both the snake and the sun in the Negro Egyptian or Chiana Intu languages is a word meaning to propagate and to go, and ultimately the word for foot. And so this is why you see, this is just to represent a crude drawing of Ra and the sun with the snake wrapped around it, because the word for snake is pronounced the same as the word for sun in the Egyptian language. And then later, the word for snake, the syllables were switched. So that's why you say R instead of Ra, Ra in for this word for snake, the Uraeus snake. So an example here is given by Westerman from 1927. He's showing that in the Sudan and the Bantu, the word for sun and snake sound similar. And so is Gua, snake, Gui, sun. And we see a similar thing here in the Sumerian. So Ashme, radiance, sun disk ornament. Ushun, first and foremost, noble, snake. We see it in another variation. Mul, star, to shine, radiate light. And then Mur, a mythical snake, a snake-like weapon. And as I mentioned earlier, in the Sumerian languages, the R's and L's often correspond and or interchange, depending on the dialect. And so this is significant. And so what I add in addition to that is the semantics of a place. Because remember what I said, that ultimately the word for sun and the word for snake derives from a word meaning foot. And then the word for foot meaning to go and propagate. And so, but the foot also denotes a place. That's why in the Egyptian language, the word for place, B, is the hieroglyph for foot, because that of that semantics. So we see it played out several times in the Egyptian language. So you see here, Rahi, light, flame, Rahu, Rahwa, sun, day, time, Ra, ray. You can see the snake and wrapped around the sun. And so remember what I said earlier, that the snake, the Uraeus, the syllables are switched in this variant of the word. And then the other variant is Rick, serpent. But this is I don't have time to go through the sound changes and correspondences within Egyptian. But you also had this word here, Ra, place, Ra, storehouse, chamber barracks. We look at another word, the so-called Aket, flame, fire, sunlight, sunshine, Uraeus. And then the nasalized volar trill is nasalized. So you have Inki, a snake here. And then you have Akiet, a room. Shim, to be become hot, heat. Shimiyet, heat, summer. And actually, this is what was borrowed into Semitic and also became the word for sun. So they say Shemesh for sun. And so it ultimately comes from the same thing. And so it's a product of fire and heat, fire and light, and the sun, and the byproducts for heat. And then you have Shimiyet, a serpent, because there's also a word Shim meaning to follow, to go, to propagate. And this becomes the word for serpent. And then Shemit, storehouse, stable, a place. And so Atenu, shine, illuminate, sun disk. Atenuit, divine serpent. Atenu, ground, earth, dust, landing place. You can see that I have 4 examples of the same semantics in the Egyptian language. So we've already seen here that Shem, radiant, sun disk, ornament, and first and foremost, noble snake are cognates. If it is truly correspondent with Egyptian, then there should be a variant of this word meaning a place, some kind of shelter or storehouse or anything like that. And that's exactly what we see here. So we have Ashme, radiant, sun disk, ornament. Ushun, first and foremost, noble, and snake. And then the word is reversed, because again, in these Negro Egyptian languages, they like to reverse the words, the syllables. And so you have the same word, but now it's just mush, snake. And then the same syllable inverse, mush, flat place, a holy place. And then these are variations of the original form, rim, storehouse, itima, shrine, chapel. But we don't have time to go through the sound changes as a result of the presence of the mid-central vowel here. And so here's another semantics. This comes from a text, an introduction to African languages, 2003, by G. Tucker Childs. He says, similarly in oceanic languages, these are languages in East Asia, the body part tooth provides an important source for the inside. So we want to talk about the inside. The same word for tooth is the same word for inside. So that which is like the tooth, which is inside the mouth. And he says it is irrelevant in African languages, meaning the oceanic languages and the African languages don't share this semantics, where the body part, the belly or the stomach, provides the primary model. This is common in Manding languages, where a cognate form is the word for stomach and functions as the postposition, meaning inside. For example, Mandika Kono. And he goes on to say some other stuff. And then I give the example here in Sumerian, where it says shag, shah, or sha'ab, inner body, heart, in, or inside. And it should be noted, and this is something that I have to give credit to Jean-Claude Embolis, is that the word for stomach, the word for liver, and the word for heart are all the same word in the post-classic stage of Negro Egyptian. And they're all used to reference the inside of the essential part of the body. So that's why for the Sumerians, they use the variant that means heart. But for the Manding, they use the specific variant that means belly. In other languages, you'll see that they use the word for liver to mean the inside. But they're all the essential major organs in the inside of the body that denotes the concept of inside. And so this is a semantics that can only be inherited from a common ancestor. And so this is another one, going back to the sun. In Egyptian, the word rahu or rahwe or rikwe means sun, day, and time. In other words, the word for day and the word for sun and even the word for time are all the same. And so in English, if we want to reference the sun, we say sun. If we reference the word day, we say day. They're not the same word. And it doesn't, you won't find, for the most part, in Indo-European languages, the same word for sun being used as the same word for day and time. They use totally separate words. They don't have the same semantics. The same thing in Semitic languages. They don't have this semantics. But in the Negro Egyptian, Shiana Intu languages, this semantics is prevalent. So in the Sumerian, you have Ud or Ut, day, sun, heat. And remember what I said earlier, that the concept of heat derives from the word for sun and fire. So just like what we saw earlier in the Egyptian. Day, sun, heat, a fever in summer. And this word Ut for sun, you find cognates in Cushitic, for example, in Oromo, Adu, sun. Harar, Adu, sun. Borana, Adu, sun. South Sudan, Andri Utu, sun. Balima, Utu, sun. Ojiga, Utu, sun. In the Dogon language, Usu, sun. Walu, Usu, sun. And so all those variations, again, and I could go more in depth in this. These are basic vocabulary words. Every language has their own word for sun and water and person and clock and day and all this other kind of stuff. So in Proto-Bantu, we see the same semantics. Tangwa, sun, day. And an example or reflex of that in Proto-Bantu is Kikongo, Intangu, sun, day, time, moment. And as I discussed in Aluja Volume 2, this Proto-Bantu word is the older form of what became Ra in Egyptian and Ud and Ut in Sumerian. But that's another conversation for another day. And so when we're looking at these semantics, it's impossible for you to make the argument that Sumerian has no relationship to these African languages. And so now we get back to that argument that he was trying to make, when it comes to the Sangiga, or the so-called blackheads. So, he kept emphasizing the word head, but I kept wondering, why would he emphasize the word head when the word sang also means person? And so there's a semantics here. The same word for head in the language is the same word for person. And so, for example, you have, in Egyptian, the word tep or teb. It means head, person, capital, and chief. In Sumerian, you have sang, head, person, capital, king. And when you have this word gig, the real word for black is simply gi, but it's repeated several times for emphasis. It's like gi gi gi, or like when you say in Igbo, you say ogg, in wilderness, darkness. But this sangiga is a word for humankind, but the word gigi or gigi is the word for black. So this is where you get the word, or the concept of blackheads from. And so what Chuck Morgan and his sources kept trying to emphasize is the stress on the hair color. And there's no indication, just as Chuck Morgan stated correctly, that there's no indication that they were speaking about the word hair. But the word, the word head here, but it's also the word for person, body. And so by the same token, you could make the argument, and I'm not saying that this is in fact the case, but there is a logical argument to be made that this is evidence that they're speaking about people. So Chuck provided all the information to show that they weren't talking about a physical head. But now you have to talk about why this word for person. Why didn't he stress the word for person in his analysis? Because now it's black person. So how does the word for black person become the word for humankind? This is what you have to answer. And what I'm arguing here is that one could make the argument. I'm not making this argument saying that it is true, but it is plausible that when these black African people came over and settled in Iraq, that they were surrounded by what we would call black African people. And this name, we don't know if this name was given to them or they named themselves this. But remember what my argument is. The people around adopted the language of the Proto-Sumerians. And either the people themselves could have named themselves this in regards to the stark difference between them and the surrounding people, or the surrounding people who have adopted their language use this to describe the original Sumerian people. And then over time, as the people begin to be absorbed genetically into the larger population, it loses all its meaning and it just refers now to the people or humankind. And we see the same thing happen in the Egyptian language, where the word for human or man and husband becomes the word for human being. And then with the collective suffix, it becomes a word for humankind. But as I showed in the actual Alluja Volume 2, this word for man and husband derives from a word that means penis, and to give birth, to propagate, into the next generation. That's from when a verb emerges. And so this is why it became associated with a man. It was a body part. And so I encourage everyone to read the last section of Alluja Volume 2, where I break down the word remech. because this same the root here is R. This same R is the same root that is in this word for sang, head, and tip or tib for head, person. This is the same root that gives you the word into, like in ba into. It's a word for body and body part. And it is from that word for body and body part that gives us the more specific connotation of the penis, and then from there the verb meaning to either ejaculate or to be erect, and then associated specifically by derivation again to the concept of a man or a husband. And just like in English, we use the word man, which has a specific connotation to also represent human and mankind. And so over time, a group of people can lose the original association with the word. So just because by a certain time, let's say 2500 BCE, that you do not see a dominance of Black African people in Sumer, in a way that you would say you would see in Yoruba land and modern Yoruba land, does not mean that they were not there. The language betrays, because the language travels with people. They didn't have radios, and there was no YouTube then. There was no music, there was no sound recordings, and that you can send a CD off or email a song to MP3. The language in things went with the people. So if you have an African language here in Iraq amongst a gang of non-African people, that means some Africans moved there. Or you would have to make the an implausible argument that these Asians came in and then just populated Africa, and they just became darker once, you know, they got deeper and deeper into Africa. And that's why you get these related languages like Wolof, Bantu, Yoruba, Akan, you know, Somali, Zande, etc., Middle Egyptian. The dominance of the related languages are in Africa. And then you have the isolate outside of Africa. So we know that the travel was from Africa out and not in from outside into Africa. And so this is why we got to be careful, you know, with these terms and these concepts. And so I want to address this slide here. He rightfully notes that the word for hair is it's not simply siki pa. The word siki by itself is the word for hair, and this has a cognate in Bantu as well as in Egyptian. It's the word sir in Egyptian. So the ki in siki became palatalized and into t, and the t into r, and that's how you get the shir for hair in Egyptian. But the Sumerians had the older form of the word, which you still find in Bantu in this modern age. So I will just end there, and I'll take a few questions if there are any, and let me know in the chat. I know there's going to be a delay, and I have not been looking at the chat, so I don't know what y'all talking about. So, you know, I'll take one or two questions. The first one or two questions that I see. Sparks on the Road asks, were they banished? Are you asking about the original Proto-Sumerians? I don't think that they were banished at all. I think that they were absorbed, that these folks settled in and married and had children with the original people, just like with in the case of the Semitic speakers. So when you look at all the Semitic speakers today, they are a very kind of light complexion, you know, people from the Levant and things of that nature. But their language is from Black African folks. And so I go into this in detail. I don't want to make this too long. So, you know, we're going on 2 hours now, and so I want to end it soon. so it's relatively digestible. So as I said before, once I get this new computer in, I'll be making just short videos on specific points and arguments, and then that way, you know, at least for the viewers who don't have the book and don't want or don't necessarily want to read the book, they still get the information in digestible chunks. And Mid S asks, all languages are connected like DNA. Um, I wouldn't make that argument. Sparks on the Road asks again, among others, who spoke other languages? Um, I don't understand the nature of that question. Is there another question? I'll answer one more question. Sparks on the Road asks, what caused the settlement? Don't know. It could be drought, could be war, could just be trade. You know, people set up colonies in places, and they bring their culture and their religion and whatnot. That's exactly what the Phoenicians did when they settled into North Africa and places in South Africa and other places. They settled, brought their culture. Same thing with the Arabs when they came into Africa. And you see, like, you know, you have like with Mansa Musa, and people in the Senegambia and in those areas, you have the king who will want to get into the trade with the Arabs and, you know, adopt Islam and make it a mandate that, you know, everybody uh, is now Muslims, and everybody starts learning Arabic, and then the Arabic language becomes, you know, the primary language of communication in a lot of these places. You know, uh, sorry, I was at part 2 with the guest that was scheduled for this great presentation. It depends on his time. So, you know, this was on the 18th that he did the presentation, and I said that I'll be doing it this weekend. So it's kind of a last minute thing. So, you know, I can't expect everybody to just drop their schedule because, you know, I have a show idea. But you know, that is in the future for sure. And he said that he'll watch it. So whether he makes a video or response, you know, I know Garfield's going to probably watch this. And so the greater point of this presentation is simply this, that we have to be more careful and we have to be more diligent when we're making our critiques. And we have to understand fully people's arguments before we make critiques. And then you have to develop the skill set in order to critique the arguments. You never just accept people's arguments at face value. You know, when we really start getting into a lot of these scholars, you'll see that their works are nothing but hypotheses. And some people just roll with the hypotheses as if they are facts. And that's something that we have to get around um, in this new day and era. So, Negus asks, did the Black Sumerians have any relationship to the ancient Egyptians? If my hypothesis is correct, it is more ancestral, the relationship. I know later on in history, the Egyptians did do trade with the Sumerians, but this is the Sumerians probably at the time when they were basically dominated by the Akkadians, you know, somewhere in like the 2,500 to 2,000, probably anywhere between 2,500 and 1,500, you know, BCE. And so by then, Sumerian wasn't even really a spoken language; it was a liturgical language, and and so it was a lot. So, but you know, my argument again is that the Egyptians and the Sumerians are related people, and that, you know, there's a group of the Proto-Sumerians who left out of the Nile Valley, and populated, a particular area in Iraq. And so remember that Sumeria, you'll see in a map, for example, let me scroll all the way back to the top if I can. So like you see here on this map, you see that the map shows like this wide area. The original Sumerians may have only existed in one little city. This is a city state. It's not like a single state with a single king and territory or anything like that. And so when it's not an issue of like a dominant group, like some group came in and had muscle and muscle they way in. It's just that when some groups come in, they're just a bit more advanced than them, and people adopt the culture because they want to be a part, they want to be in the mix as well. And oftentimes this means adopting the language. Or it could be the case like the Ma language in the in East Africa. See, the Ma language is originally a Cushitic language, and that language kept its basic vocabulary, but it adopted a gang of Bantu words and Bantu grammar. And so this may be the case even with Sumerian. The basic vocabulary words are Proto-Bantu, but because the original Sumerians were, surrounded by another group, they could have adopted, the original languages that were some original vocabulary from the languages that were around them as they were being absorbed, over time. And so there's many scenarios that you would have to consider and falsify over time. And so the whole point of this presentation is it's not as cut and dry as our good brother Chuck Morgan tried to make it seem. But that's all the questions for now. I'm trying to keep this at a reasonable time depth, so we're already 7 minutes over. So with that said, I do appreciate you all for listening, and make sure that you what's the word? You follow me on social media, as well as, if you want to support the channel, make sure that you visit the Patreon page, patreon.com/asarimhotep. That is one way in which you can support the channel and support the upcoming documentary film. And we're going to be discussing this even in the documentary film. And so you'll get some kind of pre-visuals, with online, and then, we'll get deeper on the film. And make it make sense, for the world. And so also, if you look for my contact information, this is where you can find it. And let me unshare this screen. Stop sharing. Boom. And so you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, of course, and YouTube. So, and my website at asarimhotep.com. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you can make a donation to the Cash App at $asarimhotep. And everything goes back into the channel. It goes back into the upcoming presentations. And y'all will see some killer presentations in the near future. So the first one I'm going to be doing is on Egyptian hair, and how we can use that to prove the quote unquote blackness of the ancient Egyptians. Um, and so with that said, I do appreciate you all for your time, and y'all have a good work week, and I will see you next time. Peace.